Bleiweiss.
Bleiweiss. I'm going to write that down. Bleiweiss. Okay.
Yeah.
So welcome. And we really appreciate you coming to talk about nutrition today. There have been so many, and the recording has started, guys, which you'll get a copy of the recording. And I am from the Miller Elder Law Firm. So welcome. Jen, I want you to just take a minute to tell us who you are and what you do. And then we can jump right in because I think a lot of us are anxious to just pick your brain as long as possible.
Okay. All right. So, like you said, I'm Jen or Jennifer Bleiweiss. I'm a registered dietitian. I have been a dietitian for 30 plus years. I won't put that exact number on there because that'll give away my age, but let's just say I got a big birthday coming up. And let's see, I kind of started out working in hospitals and doing a lot of nutrition support for people who are very critically ill, and just helping them to get better and to heal. And then over time it's kind of morphed into where I am today, which is kind of more in that private practice outpatient setting, trying to be a resource for a lot of people of all ages. So I'm very much a generalist. I do kind of lifestyle nutrition, so to speak. And with my clients individually, we do a lot of individualized um, counseling and instruction. And I've also kind of trained as well in sort of health coaching and techniques there. So that's been really, really very helpful because it's one thing to be a resource and to have the information. It's another thing to help guide people through making changes and actually being able to apply that information to their lives. So,
So what kind of health, like what kind of exercise? I'm just asking personally, like what kinds of things are you doing from an exercise perspective in combination with good nutrition?
well, I believe in just sort of doing some sort of daily something. So something where, getting my heart rate up a little bit, but nothing crazy. I used to do triathlons, and that was, great. It was a wonderful challenge. It came at a good time in my life. And now I think I'm just enjoying just staying active, and I want to keep my bones strong, and I want to keep as much muscle mass as I can. So I have different goals now. But I definitely was an athlete growing up, so it definitely helps. Just to kind of keep that as a priority every day.
And are you help like as you're focusing on that nutrition and exercise together, is that a lot of the work that you're doing where you're kind of like, okay, what kind of nutrition do we need if today is going to be like a heavy lift strength day, or if today I'm going to be really focusing on a little more, zone 2 cardio or something like that? Do you craft your nutrition to help you with those different types of training?
Yeah, you definitely can do that. It just depends on the sport you're doing, the intensity of it, the length of the event that you're doing. So obviously, endurance events are going to be different from, say, a quick, like I need a certain amount of energy burst. One mistake I think a lot of people make, or is just common, is that we won't eat anything before they go out to go train. Because again, the thought of having something on your stomach can really not feel good when you're exercising. So again, kind of learning what your tolerance is to that, but even something small like something lower fiber like a banana or some sort of carbohydrate, some easily digested carbohydrate, that at least you've got some fuel on board when you start exercising. And then if it's a lower intensity where you're not getting your heart rate up as much, you might be able to tolerate a little more protein, a little more fat. And then that would give you just that much more fuel. And also, having that on board might actually improve your workout.
Okay. And I love that. And thank you for that insight. I think, a lot of us, especially older women, we had this idea that we need to get up and fast.
Mm.
And then we need to go to the gym and it's like have a hard workout fasted. And it always felt like men were doing so much better with that strategy. But women, I felt like I'm not making any progress with my workouts. And like I'm watching this man like literally like crush it. And he's got, this great improvement in his fitness level. And I'm still struggling with this fasted training. And
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah. You might just be underfueled for what you're
yeah,
doing.
yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. And I started doing that, like, you know, making sure that I eat a pretty sizable amount of protein and a little bit of carbs before I go to do any kind of workout these days. And it's really helped me gain a lot more strength. And I'll tell you, like, adding protein to my own diet and doing, more impact training, like a little bit of jump training, has improved my bone density by like 4% between my last two DEXA Fit measurements. I was shocked to learn that I could actually
Amazing.
increase my bone density. And so thanks to you guys kind of figuring out what we need to do. But let's get back to basics. Sorry to sidetrack like that. Jen, a lot of our listeners and watchers on the webinar are trying to figure out, how much protein they need, what is the deal with menopause for women and perimenopause and how it affects our eating habits. And then I would also just ask, when we're talking about people who are even older, like we have a lot of clients who are in their 70s, 80s, 90s. We have a couple that are over 100. And, they always want to know more about what kinds of things they should be eating.
Okay. So let's break it
Lot.
down.
That's a lot.
Okay. So first of all, protein. So protein is something that is obviously a very hot topic right now that's out there. And if you look at a lot of products and foods that are coming out, everything is protein, protein, protein. And it is actually obviously very vital, especially as we age. So just to give just some reference points, the RDA, so this would be like the minimum to avoid deficiency, for protein is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram. So, okay, so we don't usually think in kilograms here in the state, but to give you an idea, somebody who's about 154 pounds would be about 70 kilograms because there's 2.2 pounds per kilogram. So if you just take your weight and divide that by 2.2, that tells you how many kilograms you weigh. So again, the RDA being zero point 0.8, that's after childhood, after we've finished growing. Um, that's that. Now, there's been a lot of dialogue and a lot of pushback on that number because people are starting to believe that's a little too low. And you'll even see it like out in the and I read, article, I read everything every day, but like I'll see stuff where they're saying, oh, it's almost like 2 grams of protein per kilogram, which is a little too much, right? It's that's not necessary. That's going too far. But I think it's going to be interesting when they come out with the new RDAs. I think you're going to see a number closer to 1 gram per kilogram on protein for healthy adults. I think for older people and thinking even, menopause age, and this also for men as well, it could even be 1.2. But I don't know if they'll be quite that aggressive in their recommendations. But typically, like if I were to assess someone that is trying to avoid that bone and muscle loss that we are going to have as we age, I'm gonna assess it between 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight for maintenance or to try to maintain that, right?
Per
So
day. So
yes,
1.2 per kilo. So in that person that's 154 pounds, that's 7 kilos, right?
70
And if we
kilos. Uh-huh.
yeah, so if we multiply out 1 gram or 1.2 grams times 7. I'm just going to run it. 1.2 times 7, that gives us 8.4. So what does 8.4 like mean? 8.4 grams per
Okay.
meal? Or, okay, sorry, did I
No.
mess
Okay.
that
So yeah, no.
up?
Okay. So just back up just a sec.
Okay.
So that would be 70, so 70 kilograms,
Oh, 70. Okay. All right.
70, and then
Okay.
we times that by 1.2. So that's 84
Eight
grams of protein for
per
the
day.
day, right?
Okay. Okay, got
Now
it.
we want to take that amount of protein and we want to break it down into 3 meals, basically. Now,
Right.
for a lot of people, breakfast may not be a very big meal. They wake up, they're not very hungry, they're busy, whatever, they're exercising. Like
Yeah.
I can't. So let's just say the goal is 80 grams of protein for the day. So a lot of times I'll say, okay, so we're going to do like, let's shoot for 20 grams of protein at breakfast, 30 grams at lunch, 30 grams at dinner. That kind of breaks it down. Um, if you have, let's say, an older person who's maybe only eating 2 meals with a snack in there, that might look more like, 25 to 30 grams of protein at breakfast. And then in a snack, maybe having, 10 grams and then or doing another big meal kind of earlier in the day and maybe they're getting 35, 40 grams. So in other words, there's ways to kind of play around with it, but the overall sense is that you want to kind of distribute it throughout the day. It doesn't have to be perfectly even, but you don't want to go, okay, 80 grams of protein at dinner, boom, I got it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of the thought around protein. Um, I think your other question was about um
Like, how would the hat, and let's just stick with protein. How would that
yeah,
change, like for younger people in their, I mean, I know like my daughters, they don't eat a ton, man. And I'm like, are you getting enough food? And yet they exercise, they're running around, and I worry, like, 'cause I know that's how I was when I was in my 20s. Like, I'm just not eating as much. And
yeah.
I wonder if that maybe is what contributed to some of my issues later in life, where I just didn't have the bone strength that I probably would have thought I would have. So, like, does it change like in our 20s or in our 30s or 40s? Is this going to change as we age?
I don't think it changes that much. Obviously, the growth, like when the children are growing, they are going to require, more it might be 1 grams of protein per kilogram. Anyway, when they finish growing, their adult height, weight, supposedly, zero point 0.8 is going to prevent that deficiency. I think it's more like when we get kind of more that advanced stage and we do have more pronounced that sarcopenia, that loss
Yeah.
of muscle. And for women in particular, menopause, with the loss of estrogen, we that sarcopenia and also bone loss really accelerates. Men, it also there's a drop off, but it's not the same acceleration because they don't have this huge, cliff dive of hormone that we have with menopause. So so my answer for your daughters would be, even if they're getting 1 gram per kilogram, they're probably meeting that likely, because you also have to think, even if they're getting 20 or 25 grams of protein at a meal. I mean, that's like 3 ounces of some sort of meat
Yeah.
or some beans or something like that. So they're probably getting more. And then you're also getting protein from grains and a little bit from vegetables and dairy obviously is another really convenient protein source as well. Um, so that's the reason why, yogurts and uh, dairy milks and things like that or even some plant-based or soy milks can really help kind of fill that gap. If you feel like they're not eating, a lot of protein foods at their meals, sometimes we can get a little dairy in there and that helps.
Yeah, I just saw Chobani's putting out like a yogurt. It's a Greek yogurt and it has 20 grams of protein in it per serving and no sugar added. You know, if you do the plain, it's actually quite packed with good stuff and there's not a ton of carbohydrate in there that's, gonna send me into a nap.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and again, I mean, you bring up carbohydrate. I mean, and again, carbohydrate's important. That's a fuel. But also, we need to have sufficient amounts of carbohydrate so that we have enough calories in a day. Because if we don't get that carbohydrate, we're going to take the protein that we're eating and we're going to convert it to carbohydrate. We're going to convert it to glucose because our body does need that glucose. So, my advice on that is, maybe just being conscious and aware of added sugars more so than carbohydrate, because other like whole grains and beans and things like that are, or even breads. I mean, there's a place for all those because they do give us those really important carbohydrates that give us energy and help us to kind of spare the protein a little bit. Where we want to be conscious and aware and just not overdo it is those added sugars. So that would be uh, places where you might, that would be like, putting spoonfuls of sugar in things or desserts, cookies, cakes. Even sometimes it could be in those flavored yogurts. There's, varying levels of sugar that gets added to the yogurt. Um, my advice is usually just look for one that number one tastes good to you so that you're going to eat it.
Yeah,
The ones that are zero sugar, typically it's either a plain um one, or it is, which is sometimes not always very tasty to a lot of people because it's very sour and strong. But you can, a lot of times they add like a non-nutritive sweetener like stevia or something
yeah,
along those lines, or sucralose. So if you use there's other ones that are kind of in between that are lower sugar, so they might add a little bit of sweetener to it in the form of honey or, good old sugar. And those, like Siggies, they might be a little more like in line with sort of guidelines for added sugars. So if
that's
that
great.
kind of helps,
Yeah.
like it's very confusing to go to the yogurt aisle because there's like 10,000 of them. And and you can even find lactose-free yogurts now, which is incredible. So
Yeah.
a lot of
But
variety.
on that, like the processing, because like you might be able to find like a fat-free version or like, like so what is your thought? Because I know that's kind of the other thing that we're trying to stay away from is kind of looking at these labels with a zillion product, additives and ingredients on things. How should people kind of approach picking foods to being a processed type food? I know that's something.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously processed foods, another hot topic right now. And what is the difference between ultra processed and
Right.
processed? Okay, so let's break that down. So process just means that you've taken a food that naturally occurs in the environment. So think of plants or meats or milk that comes from a cow. And we've taken it and we've adapted it in some kind of way. So we might have frozen it, we might have canned it, we might have even cut it up and washed it. That's considered processing. With yogurt, what we've done is we've added an enzyme to it and allowed it to ferment. And then maybe we've added some other things to it, like a sweetener, or some extra calcium. Um, or in the case of maybe like a canned vegetable, maybe we've added some preservatives or some sodium to it, some salt-based preservatives. So I
Yeah.
think that that's kind of considered processed. Now, ultra processed is usually when it's got, a list like, of just 1,000 not 1,000, but, a pretty good size ingredient list. And maybe some of those things you don't recognize. They're just not um, something that you would have in your kitchen every day. And again, it may not be a particularly bad food. Um, and it may not be something, it's more the ones that have just these kind of um, really, chemicals or things, not chemicals, but like maybe words that
Gum.
just,
Yeah.
yeah. And again, there's stabilizers and there's are things like that. We don't know for sure what it is in these ultra processed foods that are creating these problems, but we do know that there is a connection there. We just don't know exactly what it is. So the advice is always say, eat as much as you can, kind of these whole foods, right? Minimally processed, but also know that some processing is not bad. Making yogurt, it's a very healthful food. It's something that can be combined with a very healthy diet. It's also a great source of protein, and calcium and vitamin D and potassium. So,
But what
it's
if
not a
you
bad
take the
food.
fat out of it? Is that ultra processing, or is that okay? Like if you go with the fat-free versions of things? Because I've always
Yeah, so
debated whether that's good processing or not good processing.
It's not really a good or bad. It's more of like how much fat do you want to have in that dairy food? So, because think about milk, you can buy non-fat, low fat, or 2%, and well, 1% is low fat, 2% is lowered fat, and then whole milk. So, yes, when you take some of that fat out, that is part of a processing thing. However, it's really up to that individual how much fat they want to be consuming. So obviously, children and babies need to have only whole milk products. After two, it is very likely that you can use a low fat dairy. It's not going to hurt you in any kind of way. And if anything, you're reducing some of your saturated fat in your diet, which can be healthful long term for cardiovascular health.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna hit you with all the big questions that are in the
Okay.
nutrition, like, this is like the hot topics. Drinking alcohol. It used to be like have a glass a night, it's good for you, the red wine, or two glasses is great, it's healthy for you. And I think more and more what we're seeing, in particular in younger people, is that they just don't drink at all. And so, what are your feelings about alcohol consumption? And is there a healthy way to do it at this point?
Well, alcohol itself is not healthy. We've determined that. Although in the Mediterranean diet, you'll see, in those guidelines, to have a glass of red wine is kind of considered, and that's mainly based on sort of like there were population studies that, people who live in this Mediterranean area, and culturally they're eating a diet, and part of their diet is this red wine. But they believe that that's probably those polyphenols and those compounds within the wine that's very helpful for them. Now, for us, we know that, you know, small amounts of alcohol are, the likelihood is that, it's not going to be like a big game changer, although everybody's different. So it's so funny. My husband and I were just having this conversation at lunch the other day. So, um, So with alcohol, less is always going to be better, right? But everybody has a different relationship with alcohol. Everybody has their own ideas around what's right for them. Obviously, heavy drinking, you're going to see an increase in mortality and problems with those chronic diseases and poor health outcomes. At the same time, when the research was kind of done that like, oh, people who don't drink at all, the abstainers are less healthy, but now they're starting to think that that was kind of some flawed connections there, because it could have been too that people that were abstaining based on um, health reasons. Maybe they were less healthy, or they were dealing with some chronic diseases or some things to start with. So therefore, they were not drinking.
Mm.
So, but I think the general thing that you'll hear is for women, try to keep it within one drink per day, which doesn't mean add them all up and have seven on a Saturday night. It just means, try to keep it there if you can. But if it's zero, that's even better. Or if it's zero, so many days, and then you have a glass on the weekend, or you have two glasses, on the weekend. Okay, great. For men, they can tolerate a little more because they have more muscle mass. So they get to have supposedly up to two servings per day is still kind of considered moderate drinking. But again, less is always going to be better. There's going to be other people who are more prone to cancer or have some other genetic variabilities that for them abstaining, they might be getting more benefit from abstaining completely. So I think the jury's still out. So my advice is always look at your own situation and decide, is this something that I can reduce it? Is that a possibility? How do I kind of get to where I want to be with that? And again, everybody has a different relationship. It's also very much tied to psychosocial aspects as well. So it's different for everybody.
Okay, I'm going to circle back to sleep
Uh-huh.
and food consumption. Are they related, and how does food affect sleep?
Okay. So, you're always told like don't eat too late at night because, and it is true because once you're eating something, then you start that digestion process, right? So your body's kind of waking up. And so typically people who eat late, then it kind of messes with your circadian rhythm a little bit because your body thinks, oh, it's daytime, we're digesting, we're metabolically active, blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, if we don't eat enough and or we eat too early and we go to bed and we're still a little hungry, that can wake you up too because you're hungry. So you want to kind of find the sweet spot and sort of getting your eating in line with your circadian rhythm is what's suggested. So that's why having something to eat when you get up in the morning is helpful because, you're like, okay, I'm awake. You may or may not have coffee or tea or something that usually helps to kind of set your circadian rhythm, but also, kind of getting the digestion process going. Um, and then having that last meal somewhere maybe six or later, not too much later. Everybody has different schedules, a lot of people work late. So again, setting those goals are so individual, but also know that it can impact your sleep. But for some people, like I said, if they had kind of an early meal or they didn't get enough to eat that day, they might need to have a little snack before they go to bed, just something small. And that can be helpful, particularly if it's got a little protein in there.
And sugar before bed? I know, like, we all like wait all day, we have a good dinner, and we want to get that bowl of ice cream while we're watching the news or whatever.
Yeah.
How does that work with your sleep?
Okay. So, speaking from someone that had a mean ice cream habit for, I mean, I would say from the time I was pregnant with my daughter, and she's turning 33 this week. So, but I broke it finally because I realized it was a habit. It doesn't mean I still may not have something a little sweet, but think about the thing that you're having. I mean, you could have something that's a small little sweet thing. It's not going to make a big difference. It's not going to throw anything off. Obviously, if you have diabetes, I would, have a different suggestion. But if you are having something just a little sweet before you go to bed, it's not going to be like the end of the world. It shouldn't knock things off too much, or after dinner or something. But again, being cautious around, well, how much added sugar am I consuming over the course of the day? And also, how hungry am I? How much do I really want this? Is this something that I feel like my body needs? Um, Maybe it is. And so if you go ahead and have that little bit and you sleep better, great. So again, it's very individual. There's no
Yeah.
blanket statement on that.
Well, and I know for myself, You know, I I feel like when I did my last DEXA scan, and I learned that I had like a lot of visceral fat, like visceral fat. And it was like surprising to me because I didn't feel like I was doing anything different with regard to eating like a few years earlier. And then all of a sudden, like these changes in my body. Is that something normal, like that we're seeing with women in particular? Because I've also heard other friends kind of express that same frustration.
Yeah, and that visceral fat, which is that fat around your organs in your abdominal cavity. So it's not the fat underneath your skin, it's actually in the abdominal cavity. So that's a concern, it's problematic. It tends to increase inflammation. We're more prone to those inflammatory, kind of chronic inflammatory diseases like diabetes or metabolic syndromes, heart disease. So we do want to keep our visceral fat as low as we can. Now, again, there's also genetic differences, there's hormones, um, so many things come into play. But for sure, if that's something that you're struggling with, or you're like, I really want to kind of keep my visceral fat as low as I can. Obviously, activity is a big part of that, staying very active, um, setting a move goal every day. It doesn't have to be, oh, I have to hit the gym for an hour. It could even just be, I'm going to get in so many steps a day, and then you just kind of keep moving your goal up. The point is to keep moving, keep stay metabolically active so that you don't have that extra fat hanging around. Second thing, diet is important, and particularly paying attention to those added sugars, um, and fats and alcohol. Those are all things that can also increase, those, fat accumulation, and especially, and again, if you're genetically have that predisposition or the loss of estrogen, it's it can go there. So.
So I'll share something with everybody. I was shocked, and I didn't look any different in my body, but I hadn't gained weight. It was just this test showed me. And one of the things that I did was I started using a glucose monitor on my arm,
Ah.
and so I did that, and I was so shocked at the things that caused the spike in my glucose. And granted, Jen, it's probably everything that you say, but I always thought, oh, that doesn't apply to me. Only to learn that when I actually was monitoring my glucose, things like going to the Indian restaurant and eating rice. And I'm like, Indian restaurant is so healthy. Like, I don't eat dessert. But just eating that white rice was something that dramatically spiked my blood sugar one day. And I don't have it now. I did it for about like it was like 2 weeks that I had it
Yeah.
on, but it really gave me good information about what was causing those spikes. What do you think about that? I mean, do you think that's a good practice, or do you think that's, that may be taking things too far? It's okay, I won't be offended by it. Like I wanted to know myself what was causing this kind of increase in my blood sugars. And so think it was very helpful for me, but is that something people are doing regularly now, or do you recommend that, or is that something like, no, we don't need to go that far?
Okay, so the physiology of that is that when we eat carbohydrates in particular, our blood sugar is going to rise, right? Rice is all carbs, right? And if it's white rice, it doesn't have any bran on it, so there's no fiber. So it's going, that would be like a great thing to eat before you exercise because it's going to give you lots of glucose in your blood, for energy. So I think, again, those continuous glucose monitors are a great awareness tool to see how foods, affect your blood sugar, but it's normal for your blood sugar to rise. Um, but typically we don't want it to go, say, above 140. So and we want it to come back down, right? So we also want it there to be a nice little drop, and then usually kind of spikes up again and then it drops again. And we want to sort of stay in that green zone. You probably had a little chart with a little green zone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool.
So, yeah. So again, the composition of the diet. So with rice, we know, okay, yes, that is gonna, if we just eat rice, it's gonna spike it. So what else can we put with it to kind of blunt that spike? Well, we can put protein with it, we can put fiber with it. We could put some nuts and seeds, right? That has some healthy fats with it. Things like that. So the combination of the meal is also really, really important. People who have diabetes, that's one thing we really coach them on, is
Yeah.
how that composition of the meal is so important to trying to keep a more level blood sugar and for them to be able to manage their blood sugar with either insulin or some sort of medication. So um, it's such a loaded question. I think the CGMs are great. Unfortunately, they're out there, and I don't think there's enough education out there right now for people to know how to interpret it. But it did
Yeah.
give you that awareness that,
Yeah.
hey, if I eat straight carbs, that's going to increase my blood sugar. And maybe it went out of the green zone and maybe it stayed up there a little too long. That's a great awareness tool.
Right. I mean,
Um,
even things like I used to eat toast with my breakfast. I would eat a couple eggs, some Greek yogurt. That would be my breakfast with a little bit of toast. And the toast also put me
yeah, because,
outside. And so now
yeah.
I eat vegetables with my eggs and my yogurt in the morning. And when I shifted to that, I didn't see that spike. And I mean, it's not something that you guys haven't been telling us. It's like you've
Well,
been
but
telling us,
again,
but
is
until
there
you see it in
room?
your own body, you're like, oh,
Yeah, and so I would probably in that thing, I would say, if you're still utilizing that, I would say, hey, let's try this. Let's try that toast, but make it a whole grain toast, like a
yeah,
whole wheat, and maybe try putting a little peanut butter on it and try that. See what it
yeah,
does and see if that you have that
yeah,
spike.
yeah,
Um, so I love that you added vegetables because I'm a big proponent of, eating lots of vegetables. I think, again, they're going to give you fiber. They're very low starch, the low starch vegetables. Um, and also all the other wonderful plant compounds we get from those as well, to help fight inflammation.
yeah. Okay. All right. Enough about me. Let me just ask a couple questions for our people that are in their 80s and 90s. And a lot of times people that will review these webinars, and you guys feel free to put some questions in. Oh, we have a question right now. Let's go to our question. Does race play a role in development of visceral fat? That's the question.
Well, because, obviously race is genetically determined, there probably is. I don't know of um anything right now that's out there. It could be out there. I just don't know about it. So it's a great question. If they've been able to tie specifically like certain um people of a certain race being more prone to developing visceral fat. We do know certain things like developing diabetes, or hypertension, things like that. We definitely been able to tie that to certain ethnicities. So it is possible, right? I mean, it's genetic. So, I don't really know what the drivers are for visceral fat, which genetic drivers are there, but that's a really good question.
Okay, next question, and we might get a few more. Do you support whole food plant-based diet? So I'm
100%.
assuming that means like, look, we're trying not to use ultra processed. It doesn't mean not using simple process like you were talking about, but the idea would be plant-based and how plant-based, because I have a child who's vegan. So I'm interested in this question also.
Yes. So, yes, I would support that. If someone said to me, I choose to be vegan for whatever reason, then I think, we would look for ways then to make sure there's adequate protein there. So we want to just be careful that, there's certain higher protein plant foods available and are being consumed. Um, I love the idea of a whole food, plant-based diet for generally, I mean, for our environment, as well as for health reasons. I just think in general, our, culture in America and around the world, I mean, there's some cultures that that is the everyday and that's the norm. But here it's a much more difficult way to live. I mean, it takes a lot of intention to do that. It's not impossible, and people can absolutely do that, and they're going to have a lot of health benefits from that. But the biggest obstacle is being able to make sure you're getting definitely in that 1.2 gram per kilogram range of protein, because we aren't quite as efficient with plant protein as we are with animal protein.
That's good. Good. Okay. What about protein shakes? Are they good for us or not?
I think protein shakes, you can use them as a convenience. Everybody has a different lifestyle and the way it works in. I think dependence on them is not always great, because again, I think of protein shakes, they probably fall more into more of that ultra processed category, some more than others. So again, is that a bad ultra processed or a good ultra processed? I mean, it's good if it provides protein at a time that maybe you wouldn't consume it, or you couldn't get it, or you're missing a meal, or something along those lines. But I think being dependent on it in general is, not ideal.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna just jump back in with my own questions because I know we're gonna run out of time here. Um, the the question I have, and this is one that comes up a lot in particular, I think for women, and maybe men too. I guess I don't hear about it as much from men, but a lot of my peers are concerned about osteoporosis and our clients as well, and osteopenia, and they're also concerned about like learning that they're pre-diabetic. Like they go to the doctor, they do a blood test, and they've learned that they're pre-diabetic. And like what can they do to avoid those couple of pitfalls that can be very chronic and debilitating as we age?
Okay, so pre-diabetic, now we're talking about again those kind of at elevated levels of glucose, right? So usually it's has to do with like some insulin resistance, and they might have found that out because they had an elevated hemoglobin A1C on a lab test, or their fasting glucose was high, or they did a continuous glucose monitor and realized, wow, I'm hanging out up here in this high zone. Um, so I think that's sort of pre-diabetes. So again, the thought around that is to, hey, let's watch the added sugars, and if we're overweight, lose a little bit of weight. Let's try to improve that insulin resistance. Exercise also really helps improve, that insulin resistance as well. As far as osteoporosis goes, again, the healthful diet is also going to be perfect for that as well, because again, eating plant foods as well as adequate protein and getting enough calcium and vitamin D is really important in maintaining bone. The plant foods, because we get all these little polyphenols and flavonoids and lots of antioxidant type properties that really, really help maintain bone mass. There's also lots of vitamin K and plants. And then obviously getting enough protein so that our bodies are able to, have the muscle and maintain that bone mass. Because think about it, as we lose muscle and we lose weight, a lot of times our bones will kind of shrink too. So we want to kind of stay at a healthy weight, not underweight, and then not overweight. So that's hard, right?
Yeah.
And but again, the prescription is the same. It's, you know, fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, plant proteins, and fish. Um, Lots of, those calcium and vitamin D. If If you're opposed to dairy, that's fine. There's other kind of non-dairy alternatives that have calcium fortified in them. Um, there's also some calcium in some vegetables and things. The problem is just not very bioavailable. Um, Also, foods like sardines. I mean, who knew? But you get a lot of calcium from that because of those little bones in there. They're also rich in omega-3 fatty acids, right? So, or fattier fish like salmon, get a little vitamin D from that. Also the omega-3 fatty acids. So again, we're reducing inflammation, we're providing nutrients, and all these nutrients work together to keep our muscles strong, to keep our bones strong, to keep us at a healthy weight, to hopefully, prevent that inflammation that can then cause that insulin resistance.
Okay. I'm going to jump back to the questions that people are submitting, but I want to ask this one more question because I know it's something that is very commonly requested. Fasting. Like, even, I know we talked a little bit about fasting before exercise and that may not be the best idea, but fasting in general, where I know people are like, I'm doing a cleanse for 2 days. Like, what are your thoughts about things like that?
I mean, fasting is really rooted. I mean, it was kind of more cultural or with religious practices and things. And there are some benefits to fasting, and that sometimes for weight control, right? But I think doing these very kind of over the top fast, like 500 calories a day, or doing juice cleanses and things, those, there's really no place for those. We should avoid those altogether. Those are very disordered, and they tend to lead to more disordered thoughts and behaviors around food. Um, However, if somebody says, you know what, I would like to keep my calories, within my budget, maybe my budget. And again, I don't really promote counting calories, but in general, if you're eating sort of this healthful dietary pattern, high quality dietary pattern, you're probably going to be somewhere in there, 1,800, 2,000 calories a day. And by kind of staying within that, whether you give yourself a time window that you do that, and maybe that's between 10 or 11 in the morning and 6 o'clock at night, or you do you know, um, or like my first meal is at 6 and my last one's at 6 p.m. So the main thing is you're giving your body a chance to kind of rest and reset. And again, it has to do with that circadian rhythm. Obviously, if you're an early morning exerciser, you need that fuel. So waiting later in the morning to eat may not work. I think in general for older people, fasting is not their friend. And for a lot of women, fasting is not our friend. Like our bodies really don't like to fast, in the sense of, having these really long stretches where we're not getting anything to eat. Um, it's just not, it's not good for our hormones. It's not good for us in general.
So, on that very topic, we have a question. As people age, their hormone levels decline and require supplementation to restore youthful health and vigor. What particular hormonal declines do you focus on, and what foods or bioidentical hormone treatments do you recommend?
Oh, wow. You should have come to our menopause workshop this weekend. We had
Yeah,
some
which is
great
going on, right? Like,
physicians talking about that. Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. Um, so first of all, you really can't control your hormones with food. I will say that first and foremost. Unless you're under eating, and if you're restricting and you're not getting enough to eat, that will impact your hormones. On the other hand, if we have a really high level of fat in our body, that can also disrupt hormones. So again, the food itself is not the problem. It has to do with the condition in our body. So it all comes back to the same thought of feed yourself well. High, if you're trying to stay within a certain calorie level, feed yourself those really nutritious high quality foods first that have protein and fiber, and some good high quality carbohydrate, things like that. Feed yourself those things. um, and there's still room for a little bit of, treats and things too. It's not like they have to go away forever. But it's maybe not a habitual thing, right? It's not ice cream every night, right? Because that can be a habit that, right? Then you have to break it. So I think as far as like hormone replacement therapy, I would suggest talking to your physician. Um, whether it's GYN, and again, they're all over the map. We just did this menopause workshop with Empower Lifestyle physicians, and it was fantastic. And it was just a lot of information about, hormone replacement therapy, what's right, what's wrong. I mean, there's a lot of dialogue about that right now, and not everybody's on the same page, but some of it is like not everybody's up to speed on it. um
Thank goodness, because like 20 years is a long time to like have gotten that wrong.
yeah, and honestly, I mean, there was some really not so great, not that they were studies, but they looked back, those retrospective things, and then they weren't. Again, sometimes the way we're connecting things, we find out later, we're like, you know what, let's backtrack on that a little bit, and let's pick this
Yeah.
apart a little more and really see if there's a connection there, or if we need to rethink this. And I think we're at that point right now, and a lot of women in particular, and some men who have low testosterone levels, are really, really benefiting from getting hormone replacement therapy. But it
So
has to
much.
be right for you. It's very individual. If you have a history of cancer or anything like that, that needs to be a decision that you make with your physician.
Okay, on this to follow up, this is our last question because we're going to run out of time. Nutritional supplements that we should be using as older people. I know, like for me, it's always like we need to have creatine and we need to have collagen, and I know my doctor's like DHEA as well. So I mean, but what is it? Is it generally acceptable that we should be adding additional nutritional supplements, or what is your belief on that?
So if we're eating that high quality diet that I keep, pounding out like over and over and over, the thought would be that we don't need any supplements, right? We're getting everything we need from our foods. That's the ideal. But in reality, maybe we aren't getting all those nutrients. So that's when, a multivitamin might come into play. Or someone needs some additional iron or something like that, or vitamin D. Um, Now, as far as like, I call the collagen the sort of the fun supplement. And it is being, studied a lot more. I myself use collagen, and I have for years. And I find anecdotally it to be really helpful with skin and hair and nails. Now, is it making my bones stronger? I'm not, I have no way of knowing that, because that's a collagen matrix. You can't measure that on a bone density. It's not hard bone. Um, However, the creatine is definitely out there now. It's a very well studied supplement, but again, not for everybody. I would always say you have to look at your own specific thing. If you have any sort of kidney issues, or
Mm.
if you've been told that you have um, any kind of chronic renal insufficiency, if your physician has told you that, creatine is probably not something good. People who are particularly on plant-based diets, tend to do well with a little bit of creatine supplement. It is helpful in maintaining muscle mass. But people also notice too that when they do some creatine supplements, and we're talking like 3 to 5 grams a day, which is considered safe, you might notice a little more water retention or some weight gain or things like that. So, or you might notice some nausea or some GI symptoms. So it's not for everybody. You can clear it with your doctor first, make sure it's right for you. And then you can try it. It's well studied, it's safe. And most importantly, with all supplements, look for those high quality ones, the ones if they have like Informed Sport or NSF or USP. That means that that company has taken that extra step to make sure that their supplement is free of any kind of contaminants, and that it also has in it what it says it has in it.
Okay. Jen, we are out of time. I feel like we could go on and on all day because you are such a plethora of knowledge about, what we should be doing and how we should be doing it and eating better, and not just about the eating, but you're kind of layering it in with some of these other things that we realize we really need to focus on for good health. So thank you so much for being with us. And anyone who registered for today's webinar, you will get a video of the event. And so, stay tuned. We have a number of webinars coming up in the next few months. And I am not able to think, I know we have one on exercise. We have one coming up on, I forget. We have so many on the list. Samantha, if you want to pop in and tell us which ones we have ahead, that would be great. But if not, then we are just going to end here and thank everyone for showing up. And I'm Shannon Miller from the Miller Elder Law Firm.